Hi Year 11s, this screencast is going to be about the story called Chinese Dancing Bendigo Style by Ju In Chu on page 246 of Growing Up Asian in Australia. So firstly, a quick summary of the short story from englishworks.com. So Chinese Dancing Bendigo Style by Ju In Chu. Ju In Chu comes to accept and celebrate her difference, her in-between status, owing to the fact that as a child of an Asian and Australian parent, they were a peculiar species in Bendigo. The parents are hippies who straddle both Chinese and Australian backgrounds. When the father is vigilant with money and bargains at the market, he is described as Chinese. He is Australian when he joins the Labor Party and talks politics. Ju In feels that she is in between cultures. She is Chinese when she is thrifty and studious, and she is Australian when she played games and left food on the plate. The girls play the song entitled Asian Waif at the concert, which captures their sense of homelessness. While performing their piece, Ju In is applauded not for her talent, but for her sense of difference. The audience seem to pity her because she is out of place, nervous, clumsy, and awkward. These are her interpretations of how the audience feel, though, because it's written from her point of view. Ju In focuses on the cultural contradictions of her background and realizes that the liabilities are also assets. Much depends upon attitude and how one comes to value one's differences and what might appear as drawbacks and vulnerabilities. They begin to feel comfortable in Bendigo, which is as half-half as kooky and contradictory as we were. Okay, so the first thing I did after I read this short story was I did some character traits. So this is similar to the template that we use for Night to analyze the characters. So I'll send this through to everybody again. So firstly, I just looked at Ju In Chu and analysed her this way with traits, behaviour, perception, and purpose and conclusion. And down the bottom, I've just done a short thing on parents and the younger sister. And you could also do the community, so how she perceives the community. So traits, I looked at what can we tell about the character's personality, what does the character look like, and how do they dress? Where are the characters from? What is their social status and economic background? So a couple of quotes I've got here, and then the quotes are analysed, so what the example reveals about the character to the right here. So at the very beginning, she describes her physical features as black heads, small brown hands. So that's her and her sister when they're playing piano up the front. She describes herself as black heads, her and her sister as black heads, small hands, and then again dark eyes and straight cut fringe. So Chu continuously describes herself by her colour. Her appearance is immediately identified as a cause of major concern for her. She subtly compares her appearance with that of the blonde and brunette heads in the crowd with their round eyes. Here I thought this was quite interesting. She describes herself when she looks in the mirror as poo brown eyes and flat yellow nose, which is quite a negative description. There are so many ways to describe brown. This description has a very negative association. She describes herself as half Chinese on page 246, so in the very first, I think it's even the first paragraph there. The reader notices this to become an issue for her. So the fact she's half Chinese, we notice that to be some form of an issue, a negative issue. Growing up in a paddock in central Victoria surrounded by fifth generation Australian farmers. On page 246, so she describes her family life there. It indicates the character may feel as though her and her family do not belong in the farming field, surrounded by those whose family have been farming for many years, and who none of them are indicated to be Chinese. This bit here on 248, so she says that people would ask, where are you from? It was hard to answer, she would say. Hard to answer. Melbourne, Malaysia here. I remember meeting Dad's family from Malaysia, but she's only travelled to Malaysia. She wasn't actually born there from what I can pick up. So there was no way I was Chinese, so she's sort of struggling there with who she is. I was also confused within our family. So it was also confused because her mum was Anglo-Australian and her dad was Chinese. So does not appear to like her Chinese heritage, but wants a clear answer to who she is. But every teenager battles with this. Almost. Behaviour. So how does the character respond to the obstacle? How does the character interact with other characters? And why does the character behave that way? So at the very start, this wasn't very significant, but it could be expanded upon. So the sweaty hands. So when she was playing the piano, she described their hands to be sweaty, which indicates nerves. So a nervous trait when put under pressure to perform. They applauded warmly. We had played badly, but they loved us. Everyone felt sorry for us. So she perceived them to be clapping after they played the piano because she thought they played quite bad. So she thought that they felt sorry for her, and that's why they were clapping. So analysis of this only considers the negative possibility of the situation. Again, were they actually quite good? So I questioned, were they good? And she just thought they were bad because she had higher expectations of herself. Most people would applaud someone who had given it a go regardless of colour or socio-economical background. So as I was going through these, I was, in the back of my mind, I was thinking about other points of view or how this could be interpreted differently. So I was just making little notes down the side here about how I could do a creative response to this. When I was being thrifty and studious, I was being Chinese. When I played games and left food on my plate, I was being Australian, so 248. So such a common focus on culture. So she's always describing things relating to her culture. If her parents were both Chinese, what would her battle be then? But in our third year in the country, we found somewhere that felt a bit like home. Her attitude changes when she feels a sense of belonging. So if her family were enough to belong to, would she have battled with herself so much? So it's not until she becomes a part of the Bendigo Chinese Association that she starts to feel a sense of belonging. So if she had been happy enough or felt a sense of belonging within her family, would she have battled with her culture so much? That would be an interesting perspective. Was it the change from city to country that resulted in these feelings? I've just done some little random notes here. So some more quotes are cultural contradictions. Everyone knew what it was like to look a little different. So that's when she became a part of the Bendigo Association. She said that everyone there was a cultural contradiction because there were Chinese people married with Australian people, or what page is that on? So that's on page 249. So have a look how she says, we met the blue-eyed tans and brown-haired Wongs from the Bendigo Chinese Association. So she feels like they're not the only ones who are sort of mixed cultures. Everyone knew what it was like to look a little bit different. So she finally feels like people are starting to understand her, which is what she needed. So her attitude changes when she feels a sense of belonging. Was it the change from the city to the country that resulted in these feelings of lack of belonging? So was it that big change? What if they have stayed in the city? So that's a perspective to think about. Happy when she knew her and her family were not the only hybrid, so she calls herself a hybrid. So she started to be happy when she realised that they weren't the only ones. Appears to be less about belonging and more about being understood and shared experiences. I've just written some random bits and pieces. So when she begins to change, this is when she feels accepted, or like people understand. So not so much accepted, but she feels like the people understand her. She took her glasses off in an effort to look beautiful, describes the crowd as a blur, as the most important thing is how she feels about herself. So she's not so much concerned about the crowd at the end as she was at the start, and she describes them more as a blur rather than all their physical features that she described at the start. So at the end, you can sort of see her starting to be more confident with herself, and it's more about how she feels and how others see her. They were cheering her on, and she did not question it at this time. So it was probably exactly the same crowd of people. It was just that how she felt. So how she felt sort of changed the way that she saw the crowd. So perception after that, how does the character perceive himself or herself? What do other characters say about her? So this, because it was only from her point of view, this bit here, what do other characters say about him or her, isn't approached at all throughout the text, only what she thinks that they think about her. So it's quite one-sided. So that would be a really interesting path to take in terms of creative writing if you wanted to start thinking about how other characters might see her, not just from her point of view, because her point of view is quite negative until towards the end. Chinese kids everyone felt sorry for, the only Asians in the competition. So her interpretation of waif was quite negative and links this to herself. So I googled what waif was because I'd never used that word before, and it is like a poor, skinny. Where did I put it? Bits and pieces. The Asian waif. I'd never heard of the Asian waif, but I knew it had some major significance. So I googled Asian waif. I got nothing. Googled waif, and I got the dictionary definition. So it's a homeless person, especially a forsaken or orphan child, an abandoned young animal, a person, especially a young woman, who is thin or gaunt. But then I googled some other stuff to do with waif, and I came across the waif look, which is when Kate Moss was popular on the runway. And it could be indicated with beauty if you wanted to take that road of how she associates the song that she's playing with quite a negative view on herself. But I'll go into that later. Don't worry about that right now. Okay. So what did I write? What if she didn't have a negative association with that word? Or what if she thought it meant something positive? A person feeling down about themselves always sees the negative. What if she was to see everything as a positive? So they took in our dark eyes and straight cut fringe. Again, her interpretation of the audience. She cannot determine what they are thinking. They could have, her and her sister could have been really good on the piano. The audience only interpret this from her perspective. So sorry, the reader, we, only interpret this from her perspective. So she's saying that, they were looking at her dark eyes and straight cut fringe, but they might have been sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, those guys are really good. So first person narration, her point of view only, it's a really limited perspective. So in the hallway's mirrors, I caught a glimpse of my poo brown eyes and flat yellow nose. I find that description really powerful because it's just so negative about herself. So a sad and negative perception of self. This quote reveals how much her appearance is affecting her confidence and self-worth. Children do not begin to think this about themselves unless somehow prompted. So what has made her begin to feel this way? Has someone made a comment? Has she been exposed to books where the protagonist is always a white female? That was something random that I thought of as I was going through. We don't seem to belong anywhere. A very sad and powerful comment. What would other members of the family think if they heard her say this? So she's sort of generalized them to say, we don't seem to belong anywhere, but what if like her parents feel like they do belong there? What if her siblings think that they do belong there? So she's sort of categorized her whole family into one, but we can only interpret that she doesn't seem to feel like she fits anywhere. So what does it mean to belong? Is belonging to a family not enough? What about those who do not have a family? What would they see if they looked at you with dedicated parents that wanted her to have a good life in the country? So that was just a perspective that I thought would be interesting to look from. So how she said that there's like 5th generation farmers there. Well, what if there was a kid in one of those families that, yes, they were full Australian, they've been there for years and years, but if they didn't have loving parents, they might look at Shu and her family, or Shu, anyway, they might look at their family and be envious of that. So she's quite limited in her perspective. The kids in my country primary school had sandy hair, pale, freckly skin, and blue eyes that could read the board from the back of the room without corrective lenses. So this goes on for 2 paragraphs. So it's quite interesting how she describes like Australian children. So with Australian mum and dad, because she's Australian too, but with a white mum and dad. And then the next paragraph, she describes her and her sisters, and it's, I guess, quite a negative tone. So an interesting comparison that could be argued, the grass is greener. So yes, she's looking at them and she's thinking, oh my gosh, they look like everybody else and everything's perfect, but is it really? So she doesn't know. And they could be looking at her and thinking the reverse, or the same, that, they would like to be them. It was hard to know if we were the odd ones out at school because we were half Chinese or because we had middle class urban hippie parents. So here it becomes not so much about her culture, but the fact that her parents were different to all other parents. So which is something that I think a lot of teenagers go through anyway, embarrassed by their parents. So that's something that you should be able to relate to. We are peculiar hybrids. She's too young to appreciate her unique beauty. So what if they were praised for this? Would her opinion change? So if they were told that they were beautiful, if everyone, well, it doesn't really say that people look at her or say anything, but the only comment that she makes is people say to her, "Where are you from?" So what if that comment was never made and it was just commented about her beauty or something like that? Would her opinion on herself be different? She starts to question because she's not perfect. As good as the piano, it seems to be, the piano seems to be an issue for her. So there was no way I was Chinese because I wasn't perfect of that. So perception of Chinese, that they do everything well, because she doesn't, she judges herself. It wasn't until I grew up I realized a lot of Chinese things were just dad things. So it sounds like when she was younger, she judged her dad a lot on his culture and so she said he's calm, hardworking because he was Chinese. So she sort of judged him just because of his Chinese. But she says, wasn't until I grew up I realized a lot of Chinese things were just dad things. We were half and half for a long time. We didn't belong anywhere. So again, generalizing her family. Did the others feel as though they belonged? What made her feel as though she didn't belong? This here is when she starts to be involved in the Bendigo Chinese Association. So she says that we weren't all friends, but we were a tribe. So it was really important for her to feel a sense of belonging. Those differences went from liabilities to being assets. She perceived these as liabilities. What if she always saw them as assets? So even before that, what would her attitude be like if she saw her differences as assets rather than liabilities? Part Chinese, but mostly Australian, same and different, just a little bit special. So that's her closing sentence. So that's actually quite powerful because she goes from calling herself half Chinese to part Chinese, but mostly Australian. So it indicates that she's really feeling a sense of who she is and she's beginning to be confident with herself. So purpose, what is the purpose of the character in the story? She makes the reader question, what does it mean to belong? Pride in self, family, and heritage is essential to feel a sense of self-worth and belonging. So these are just random things that I thought stood out in the text that are a bit more universal that can be linked to anyone. Can anyone feel a sense of belonging when they are in a community where they feel no one can understand them? Conclusions. What conclusions can we draw about the characters? What lessons can we learn? So her happiness is dependent on her sense of belonging. Her transition from labeling herself half Chinese to part Chinese, but mostly Australian, highlights her need to understand where she fits in a small town and where her physical appearances and upbringing make her feel like she stands out. So I thought her parents and her sister were quite interesting because they may give a different perspective on Ju In than what she gives us. So she gives us quite a negative, I guess, perception of herself. But what if someone saw her differently? That would be a really interesting angle to take for your creative piece. So the parents, they had met at uni, married despite the dismay of their families, and given their kids Chinese names that only dad knew how to pronounce. So he was obviously quite proud of his heritage if he's going to give them Chinese names. Dad had stopped hanging out with overseas students and mum had stopped going to church. So why did that happen? Were people rejecting them together, or did they just feel that maybe their family was more important than all these other activities that they had in their lives? So interesting that these two must have fought to be together. So it says the dismay of both their families. So it is quite interesting. As parents, they are most likely trying to give their kids the best in life. Why did they move to the country? Parents are very intuitive. How did they feel as they watched their daughter reject her heritage and family, or did they know about it? What would their conversations be like behind closed doors? So they both obviously married for love, sacrificed a lot to be together, gives an indication of a happily married couple that are trying to find their feet together with their family. And they obviously don't have, I would assume they wouldn't have that much support just because his parents would be both Chinese and they would have their traditions that they would stick to, and possibly her parents, because she went to church every Sunday, maybe they wanted her to marry another Catholic, and so they've shunned her too. So they're trying to find this, they've got this unique sort of little relationship going on where no one's similar to her, no one understands them because they're different. So difference between my parents were often put down to cultural factors. So where did she get this idea from? If her father was the only Chinese person she had met, which she mentions, where were these stereotypes coming from? So where was she hearing them, which I think is quite interesting. If they were the only Chinese people around, where are these stereotypes coming from? Dad wasn't stereotypical Chinese at all, that in moving away from his origins, he had evolved into his own peculiar species. So she doesn't find that out until afterwards. So she reflects on her upbringing. There's a little bit of hindsight in there. And she says that all these things that she thought were Chinese traits are actually just her father and who he is. So did he battle with this in finding his own feet? If he were to do it from his dad's point of view, moving away from his tradition and beliefs, did he struggle? What were the factors that may have challenged him? Did he have to fight battles against his family, so his parents, after they shunned the marriage? You could talk about the farm life and money issues. So when the drought came about, and then when the goats ran away and all that sort of stuff. So there's obviously some struggles that went on in their lives. Did they not think about the children and thought only of proving their parents wrong? I don't think they would have, because they sound like lovely people from what I can read. But it'd be interesting to see your perspective. The younger sister who was up there on the piano with her, I thought that would be a really interesting perspective to take as well. She might have looked out at the crowd and saw smiling faces and positivity rather than people who Ju In thinks are judging them, or felt sorry for them, more accurately. So the younger sister, along with some clumsy plonks from my sister. So I thought this is interesting because of the way that Ju In describes this. Maybe her sister was trying really hard to impress her or something like that. We lurked at the edge of the playground, so she involves her sisters there. They're lurking at the playground and ate their lunch in the library. Maybe her little sister liked doing that. Maybe she liked being around her. We were the odd ones out at school. Did her sister agree with that? Did she see it differently? Okay, so once I had done that, once I'd gone through all the characters and got to know them as best that I could, I just did a little outline of the storylines. So there were 5 main events that I could pick up on. So I called it the Asian way. So plays piano to a room full of blonde and brunette heads, feels they played badly but assumes they applauded them out of pity. So a key quote here, the room was silent. 200 blonde and brunette heads angled attentively, ready to hear us play fond. I think that's meant to be, I don't know what that's meant to be. We'll just put a line there. Maybe 200. Round eyes blinked unexpectedly. No. 400. I know this is not relevant to do, but anyway. So 400 round eyes blinked expectantly. So introduced herself as a novelty show, so that she was in a way humouring them because she was Chinese. The reader, us, visualised 200 identical individuals sitting in a crowd. Oh, I get it. So in the hallway mirror, I caught a glimpse of my poo brown eyes and flat yellow nose. So again, I said the negative association. So we get an idea immediately of how she feels about her looks. Next, she goes into her home life. So she introduces her family. The children are half Chinese. She describes them as half Chinese. She tells us that the parents met at uni in the city and moved to the country to live a more natural lifestyle. Once she talks about the family, she goes on and starts talking about school life for herself. So 2 paragraphs that compare the differences between white Australian children and herself and her siblings. So positive, envious tone initially, then transitions to a negative tone when discussing herself. So key quotes, we didn't seem to belong anywhere. It was hard to know if we were the odd ones at school because we were half Chinese or because we were middle-class urban hippie parents. So she has a few struggles going on there. Confusion with the family is the next thing she goes into. So she says that she says not only was it disorientating in the wider world, it was also confusing inside our family. So differences between my parents were put down to cultural factors. The next thing that occurs is she finds a place to belong. So they join the Bendigo Chinese Association. She begins to feel a sense of acceptance and that they understand her, because she says, we met the blue-eyed Tans and the brown-eyed Wongs. And then finally, the last section is not Asian waifs. So this is obviously quite important, the Asian waifs. She brings it up again at the end. So Chu ends her narrative similar to how she began, in front of a large group of townspeople. However, her transition is evident and she refers to herself as beautiful, or wanting to look beautiful, and believes that the crowd are cheering her on, not out of pity. She describes the crowd as a blur, indicating she is no longer comparing herself to others and is proud of who she is. So it's a nice ending, and it relates back to the opening ideas. So then I started to think about the setting. So Bendigo has been gossiped to lack multiculturalism. This is an interesting setting to expand upon. So I'd be interested to see statistics on the range of cultures living in Bendigo. It'd be interesting to recontextualize this story to a Muslim teen in recent years when a mosque was proposed to be built in Bendigo. I've got an article that I looked up here. So I looked up obviously the mosque being built. So Bendigo, a city split over multicultural factors. So this was in 2015, so it really was long ago. There was a quote in here, which I've written down here. So the violent protests held last week over the proposed mosque. Oh yes, we don't like it, says the woman. We've just come back from a holiday in Britain and it was all brown faces everywhere. This is 2015. We don't really want one here. I don't mean to be racist. What's the worry with brown people? You worry about the trouble they'd bring, says the woman. So you can see that there's quite a little bit of racism, even though she says she's not racist. There's definitely racism still occurring in Bendigo. So what would it, at that time, you could recontextualize and write about what it would be like for a Muslim in 2015 to live in Bendigo, or a teenager, similar to the protagonist in that story. A lot of her symbolism was through words, so Chu's use of language is symbolic and held a much deeper meaning. For example, the word half symbolizes Chu's struggle with who she is. This word represents her feelings of emptiness in terms of who she is and where she belongs. At the close of her experience, she describes herself as part Chinese but mostly Australian. So you can see that she's dropped the half and she's just become part, but mostly. So they've got a bit more of a positive connotation to them. So the change in language indicates confidence in who she is. So removing the half encourages the reader to feel that she is not. She is whole. Good proofreading, Miss Spence. Narrative voice. Chu writes from first person. The reader is very limited to just her view. This leaves a lot of unanswered questions. For example, did the other children exclude them? So she's saying that they were sort of on the outside. Were they just shy people and didn't try and involve themselves, or were they actually excluded by children? So that I find quite interesting, because we only see it from her point of view, and she only makes a simple statement about how they hung around the side of the playground and then sat in the library. So how did the community see the family? What were teachers like towards the family? What were people in the community like? Were they involved in community things? How did the parents feel, and why were they so persistent to live off the land even in the drought? Was it as bad as Chu made it out to be, or was it dramatised from a child's point of view? And what were the siblings experiencing? Similar or different experiences or views? It would be interesting to write from a third person's point of view, so including a range of family members, their views on society at this time. Did they feel different, half, happy? So you could include that reference to half. There was also no dialogue, which I found interesting. This added to the limited point of view. Chu does not converse with anyone, therefore we are limited extremely to how others may have been feeling. Therefore, we are extremely limited to how others may have been feeling or what they were thinking, because we only see it from her point of view. The only link to another's voice is when she comments that people would ask her, "Where are you from?" There was no indication of malice in this question, could have simply been interest. It emphasizes her insecurities. Or you could also do a very limited, like you could keep this narrative voice and you could do, say from her mum or her dad's point of view, probably her, yeah, it's up to you. And you could keep that really limited point of view and you could, it would emphasize how everyone sees things differently and the events that occur were perceived differently from a child to an adult. Language. So her language choices are careful and precise. The words she selects to describe those around her reflect her mood and both others and herself. So when she describes them as poo brown eyes, she could just say my brown eyes, but the choice of saying poo brown eyes kind of describes it as dirty. And her dull black comb cut hair. So the dull, she could have just said black, but the dull gives it quite a negative. And the home cut hair, so home cut hair indicates that maybe they didn't have the money to go out and get it cut nicely, like what I'm sure she's seeing or perceiving other people to have their hair cut like. The stereotype was very interesting. It appears to live her life based on stereotypes at this time, very focused on the stereotypes of Chinese culture. It appears to categorize her father not as her father but as a Chinese man. When comparing mother and father, father's traits appeared to be less relaxed and more restricting in comparison to the idealistic Australian traits. Because he was Chinese, she would say at the end. Okay, so after those things, I went into thinking about the theme. Well, after I read it, I dot pointed a couple of theme topics down. So obviously growing up is probably addressed in every single story. So growing up, because of the title, Growing Up Asian in Australia. Just going to stop talking about that. Growing up, fitting in, self-perception. So she kind of had a desire to fit in, but she didn't, from what she indicated, didn't make any effort to. Self-perception, so the way that she perceived herself and the things going on around her. Differences. Family, acceptance, misconception, again, like that was how she perceived herself, but it could be misconstrued. Insecurities and understanding. So I've highlighted the two, so self-perception and understanding it too, that I would like to develop a more specific theme about. So I want to make a statement using those two. So the first one, when growing up, insecurities can result in a misperception of self. So I thought if I use this theme to do a creative piece, I could emphasize this theme. It is important that we see Ju in from a different point of view. So to be able to see that her insecurities are a result of misperception of self, we would need to see the events from someone else's point of view, whether it be her sisters or her family or her parents. To be able to see that they're misconceptions due to her insecurities, we'd need to see it from another's point of view. Someone who's not clouded by these misconceptions of being half Chinese and that being a negative. Feeling understood. So another theme statement that I developed was feeling understood is one of the most fundamental human needs. Well, I actually Googled what is the importance of feeling understood. So why is it really important? And this statement came up in the first article that I read. So feeling understood is one of the most fundamental human needs. So I found that quite interesting because obviously she doesn't feel like she's being understood. So she's isn't receiving those basic human needs, and so therefore she's really unhappy with her family, she's unhappy with herself, she's unhappy with her life, and she sees everything really negative just because she doesn't feel like anyone understands her. So compare another sibling who feels understood and is not fazed by these differences. So that would be a good sort of point of view to write about. So what are their experience? Ooh, gross, that's bad. Compare another sibling who feels understood and is not fazed by these differences. What are their experiences like? We weren't all friends. Everyone in the group knew what it was like. So even though they weren't all friends, the fact that they understood what it was like to have, I think she says a parent who go into parent-teacher interviews and just sit there and want to talk about her grades forever. So maybe no one else that she knew understood what it was like to have a parent that really wanted them to get the highest grades and go to the top of the class. So we knew how good it felt to have these differences go from being liabilities to assets. So all of a sudden she's a part of a group, so she's saying we all the time. So she feels like she's understood and she's a part of something bigger, which is really nice. These are random bits and pieces that I wrote down. I don't know if they're significant to anything that you might use in your creative piece, but it doesn't matter, I'm going to tell them anyway. So this quote, our feet not quite touching the ground. So this was at the very start when she was talking about sitting on the piano. So I thought it kind of related to their innocence and their age and lack of worldly experience. So their head's in the clouds, they're unaware of what is really going on around them. Well, she's unaware of what's really going on around them. So she's only seeing this from her point of view, her perspective. But really, if her feet were on the ground, she might have been seeing it from a different perspective. We played badly, but they loved us. I think I talked about this before, but mostly everyone who sees someone giving it a go is going to clap them and praise them and say, good job. It's not just because of their race or colour that we're going to clap them and go, oh, good job. So again, her misconception, or she misconceives the situation possibly due to her own insecurities. And I've talked about that, the Asian waif. So it would be interesting if you talked about how, so for example, what if the little sister, when she was practicing in the library, she might have seen the waif look on the front of a magazine and saw Kate Moss and thought, oh, waif means beautiful. So to her, the Asian waif meant the beautiful Asian or something like that. So that could be an interesting take to play on that word. The hall was silent. I like this because silence can be construed in so many different ways. So Ju-in relates this silence to a negative experience. I began to wonder if this silence could be looked at in a different manner. The people I thought who could provide different perspectives of this silence were the little sister and the audience members. So if you were to talk about it from the sister's point of view, you might start off your story by saying the hall was silent, everyone was really engaged and excited about our play, so about the piano playing. So hers would be a lot more positive than what Ju-in's is. Okay, so the main question you need to ask yourself after you've collated all that information and thought about what are the themes, what are the characters, the plot line, and you should have a list of things that you think that you could write about. So the main question is, what do I want to explore further? So you might think about the plot. So what is missing or unexplained? What else might have happened? Character, expanding on minor characters such as the little sister or the parents. Changing narrative perspective, so different point of view. And what does another character think about an event? You might think, what if I change the setting of the story? So like I said, what if they never moved to the city? I don't think I said that actually. What if they never moved to the city? Could she have similar experiences? Would these be more challenging, less challenging? If you change the era it was setting, so still in Bendigo, but what would the experience be like for a teenager in Bendigo today? What challenges would they face if they were half something? Or even if they were just a little bit different, like when I said, I shouldn't say different, but if there was like a young Muslim boy in 2015. So other things you can think about that I wasn't sure if they fit for this story, but you might find something. If you change the plot, if you change the genre, if you change the technical aspects of the text, the narrative style, the language used, or if you change the form it was written in, so did it from like a play or a letter or diary entry. No, never mind. Whatever you do, the original text needs to be at the heart of your story. So what is the heart of the story? The heart of the story are things like the theme, the characters, the style, the plot. So if I was to write focusing on the theme, so when growing up, insecurities can result in a misperception of self. As I said before, my purpose would to build further on this theme. So why? Because we only see one perspective throughout this story, and I'm really interested to know what our parents, sibling, or community members were thinking or feeling at this time. I want to see Ju-in from a different point of view. I feel the reader's perception of her very clouded by her lack of self-worth. So questions I want to be able to answer is, was she a good piano player? Was she excluded at school? Did her sisters feel the same way she did about being half Chinese? Did the siblings ever discuss their feelings? What was their family life like? How did the parents view their life? So making sure that there's a strong link to the text, I will follow a similar storyline, battle with stereotypes, self-perceptions, differences, etc. Have the protagonist find a place where they belong and have them come to be proud of who they are. So, what was I thinking? So even if we wanted to change, have when growing up insecurities can result as a misconception. So you could have the sister go through the same things as the little sister go through the same things as Ju-in and just retell the story from her point of view, but do it from a really positive perspective. Or you could do the parent's point of view and indicate that because of Ju-in's insecurity, she sees everything a lot more negatively and misinterprets who other people see her to be. If you wanted to change the character, which is sort of similar to the theme in terms of, I felt this was really interesting. So this idea interests me in terms of the parent's perspective. So did we feel grimy next to the clean white girls because we had olive skin, or because during the drought we only had a bath once a week in water from the dam? So no parent wants their kids to feel this way. I want to know what was occurring at this time, what this reflection over dramatized, and what were the conversations that were going on behind the scenes for the mum and dad. So mum or dad, I'm very interested to know their story, what battle they went through to be together, what they thought when they moved to the country. Was it what they thought? Did they see changes in their children? Were they concerned? Did they ever discuss with their children or themselves how the children were coping with the change? You can see there's lots of questions for mum and dad. Linking to the text, so how do I make sure that I'm still focused around the text? So you could have the protagonist reflect on Ju-in and her changes. Does she verbalize the stereotypes she has to her parents? Does she subtly say to them one day, like, oh, Dad, it's because you're Chinese? And what does he think about that? What was it like for the parents when their plans of veggies and goats failed? What were they discussing when they resorted to selling plastic earrings? Discuss the drought and how they felt they could push through. So that would be really interesting. Why did they think it was the best thing for their family to stay there? What discussions did they have with their friends when they talked with their new friends and drank red wine? I just thought that would be a link to the text because she talks about how they have all these new friends. So you could even draw on why the mum stopped going to church and why they could discuss this with their friends, and why dad stopped talking to his friends overseas, and how their relationship with their own parents is going, how they think their kids are going, those sorts of things. So conversations between the friends would be a really interesting take as well. If you wanted to do it from the little sister's point of view, it could be an interesting perspective. I've said this a couple of times, so I'll just repeat it. The only time she was mentioned was at the beginning with her clumsy plonking on the keyboard. What did she see when she was up there? How would she describe their faces? What did she think about the song The Asian Waif? What if she had have thought waif meant something beautiful like the magazines describe the supermodels to be? What if she looked in the mirror and saw beauty? What if she didn't know about stereotypes of Chinese? Her steps are similar to her sister's. She was in the library with her lurking near the playground. What if she saw things from a more positive outlook? What would this look like? So this links to the text. Follow Ju-in's experience, but share them from her sister's point of view. So even at the start, she's up on the piano with her. So how did she see the crowd? And after that, talks about her family life. So how does she see her family life? She might see it a lot more positive. And then how does she see school life? Ju-in sees it quite negative, but she might feel like they're special or something. So they go to the library to keep learning because their dad wants them to be really smart. So she's happy with that. And how she feels about, does it make any changes for her when they join the Bendigo Chinese Association, or is it something else that made her feel like she belongs and she doesn't so much need that as what her sister does, but she sees her sister happy in the end? So many possibilities. That will do, I think. So what I suggest that you do, if you're reading any of them, I would go through and do all the characters first, the traits, the behaviors, the perceptions. Think about what the purpose of this character is and the conclusions, and then just do some dot points about other characters, and you might want to do from their point of view. Definitely language, so think about the language they use, how it's significant, and themes. Definitely do themes. So list a number of topics for themes, and then try and write sentences that are a bit more accurate, or a bit more have a bit of a stronger link to the text, I guess, rather than just having these simple topics that could link to anything otherwise. And then, yeah. Okay, good luck. Enjoy.